Wendy Capewell, an experienced counsellor and psychotherapist. I work with so many people who feel that they're the only ones struggling with the issues that they share with me. Possibly, like many of you, they feel so alone. And so the aim of this podcast is to talk to guests who have their own stories to share, their experience of the struggles that they've been through, or maybe they're continuing to live with, offering their insights as well as their inspiring journey. So let me introduce my guest. Hello there, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I've got Chelli Pumphrey with me today. She is a licensed counsellor, relationship coach, and an author. And she lives in the United States, which is quite a few thousand miles away from the UK. And hopefully it's a bit warmer. It's pretty chilly here today for a spring day. But yeah, I'm going to hand over. Introduce yourself, Chelli. Tell everyone about yourself.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you, Wendy, for giving me this opportunity. I always love to talk to people on the other side of the globe. And yes, it's a little bit of a chilly day here in Colorado in the US. So yes, I am a licensed professional counselor. I've had about 30 years of clinical experience doing therapy, and primarily I work with trauma and toxic relationships. And recently I've also written a book, and it will be published in May. And the book is called Insight is 2020, How to Trust Yourself to Protect Yourself from Narcissistic Abuse and Toxic Relationships. And just is all about my passion of helping people understand toxic relationships and how to protect themselves.
That's great. And hopefully I'll be able to put the details in the show notes so when it goes out. But yeah, have you got a date in May when it's coming out?
I'm still waiting on the publisher, but it looks like it'll be the end of May, somewhere in there. So no official date yet.
Oh, well, we have to look out for it anyway. Okay, so toxic relationships. I have to say I've been in a toxic relationship. It was quite a few years ago now. And I think it's one of those things that, for me, I didn't actually recognize it straight away because he was so caring, so loving, so attentive, so kind. But then it started, just those things that were coming into it. Why are you dressing up to go to work? Why aren't you doing this? Why are you late home? There will be all those kind of little innuendos. And so you want to please your partner. You want to go, okay, I think that's how it started for me. Well, no, I don't dress up specifically. I like dressing up. But then we always dress up on a Thursday. What's going on a Thursday? Well, no, there's nothing on a Thursday. But it's that kind of, I was kind of looking back on it, it was like water dripping on a stone that just wore away gradually until several years later, I was walking on eggshells, terrified of putting a foot wrong. It was really, really awful by the end of the time.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, no, say it.
Well, I was just going to say, I love that metaphor of, the water dripping on the stone, because that is such a great, it's just such a great metaphor that describes these relationships and how it's easy to get sucked into them because they can start out very subtle. And these people who have, one of the things I work with, one of the things I do is help people understand that most of the people in these toxic relationships are people that have some degree of personality disorder. So they could be a narcissist, a sociopath, or even a psychopath, or they might just have traits and not even be fully diagnosable. But if they have some degree of these personality disorders, they often can have a lot of charisma and be very seductive and charming and superficial in the beginning, where everything seems wonderful. You think you've met Prince Charming, and all of a sudden you realize, later on down the road, I always like to say it's not Prince Charming, it's Prince Harming or Princess Harming that you've fallen in love with, as you realize you're being controlled, you're being manipulated, you're being gaslit. So yeah, I love that metaphor that you used.
Yeah, because I think you start out and you think, oh, everything's wonderful, and you do want to please each other. And if they've got their little quirks or their little insecurities, it was a sense of maybe there was something in me. I desperately was feeling lonely, so maybe I didn't make the right choices. And there was that being kind to somebody and caring. If they're showing that kindness and caring, does it really matter if I do that one small thing? Does it really matter? But then they become more and more and more. And I think you notice it, but it's a little way down the line when you're entrenched in there to some degree. And then it just starts feeling uncomfortable. And yeah, it was before I ever got involved in what I'm doing now as a counsellor. But at that time, I was told that he had borderline personality disorder. I didn't know what that was. He even took me to go and see his GP to reassure me that he was a nice guy. So his doctor, yeah.
Yeah.
And he's a nice guy. I'm thinking, okay. But then it all unravels and it's, wow, this is really awful. And what I was going to say, but I know we haven't really started on this yet, but it was afterwards me thinking, how could I, as an intelligent, independent woman, get myself into this relationship? Yes. What am I doing? There must be something really wrong with me. And I blame myself so much.
Yes. Wendy, and that's why I wrote this book, because I asked myself that question so many times. I've been with more than one narcissistic partner, and, it was a relationship where I woke up realizing, oh my gosh, I've done it again. I thought I had broke this pattern. I mean, here I am as a therapist. I work with this. I help people get out of their own toxic relationships. I should know better. I should be able to spot this in 2 seconds, And here I was in another relationship with a narcissist. And, part of it was he was what we call a covert narcissist, where they appear very different than a typical, kind of what we think of as a typical narcissist, this grandiose narcissist, where they can be a lot more kind of showy with their egotism. They aren't afraid to say that they're the best at everything, or, they show their superiority. But a covert narcissist is somebody who can often seem a little more reserved, and they can exhibit shame. They might, tell you lots of things about how they worry about how other people think about them. And you see this kind of vulnerable side of them that you may not see with a grandiose narcissist. And yet, as using your metaphor, as that water drops on the stone, you start to see over time these, this other side come out and, realize, oh my gosh, I've been nice to this person. I've been feeling bad for this person. And especially for, people that tend to have really big hearts or very caring, you might identify as an empath or a sensitive person, and you just see this wounded person and you're trying to love them and forgive them for their behaviors. And all of a sudden you realize, oh my goodness, I've been forgiving abusive behavior.
I love that you got company with your cat. I love it.
Apparently the door got opened.
It's fine. They have that habit, and it's going to be warm there, so they want to cozy up with you.
Right.
Yeah, have your cat there. I think it's lovely. Yeah, and it is that. It's very hard to tell sometimes, isn't it? Especially, I think for me, I was feeling vulnerable at that point. If I was feeling more discerning, if I was feeling more self-confident within myself, I think I would have had more warnings. I say that, but I still know that they can sneak in when you're just least expecting it.
Right.
Because part of being in a relationship, isn't it, is to allow ourselves to be vulnerable.
Right.
That's how you deepen the relationship, isn't it?
Right. Right. So true. Well, and one of the things that I found as I was doing research for my book is that there's a lot of misconceptions about how and why we become vulnerable to these types of relationships. And one of the common beliefs is that most people who wind up with a toxic partner has issues with codependency, or maybe they've had a background of trauma, they grew up with abuse in their family. But there's a researcher in this field that works with these types of relationships. The more clinical word is called a pathological love relationship. Her name is Sandra Brown, and she's done a ton of research about this and found that the majority of women who get into these relationships actually are not codependent, and they don't have significant trauma histories, but what they have is certain personality traits that make them vulnerable. And what these traits are conscientiousness and agreeableness. And basically what those look like is agreeableness is where we're very flexible. We go with the flow. We're very forgiving. And, we're kind of the nice people. I say we, because this was my downfall in getting into these relationships. But you put up with this bad behavior because you're like, okay, I'm going to give you one more chance. I see you're just acting from this wounded place. You're very compassionate. And then the conscientiousness is, it has traits like that as well, where you're forgiving, you're putting up with this kind of stuff. But the conscientiousness is what tends to keep people involved in these relationships for the long term, because people who are conscientious often are very loyal. They have a lot of integrity. So they're like wanting to go the extra mile to make the relationship work. They're not going to throw in the towel easily. They're like dedicated. I'm going to get this done. I'm going to figure this out. And so those two traits combined are like this really lethal combination that can get a very quote unquote nice, responsible, smart person who should know better caught up in these relationships with these toxic partners.
Yeah. I recognize all that, but I'd also add into that the fact that I was a people pleaser.
Yes.
That was from growing up.
Yes.
Trying to get that attention, to be loved, all of that other stuff that we crave as a child. Yes. So I grew up I've got to get it right because I want them to accept me. I want them to love me. I want them to be there for me. And it just flowed on from there. It went into every part of my life. So that was a hang up from that, definitely. So it is conscientious, it is caring, it is all of those things. But the reason for me, I know, was that I was that people pleaser.
Yes. And that people pleasing is what that agreeableness trait looks like. Yeah. And conscientiousness. It can also be codependency. And, one of the things I like people to understand is that if you think, if you're going to therapy, you're trying to work on why did I get caught up in this kind of relationship? And people are looking at this old way of, I'll say this traditional way of thinking of it's codependency, and they're trying to treat codependency, but you actually are not codependent, but it's your personality trait that makes you this agreeable, conscientious person. The difference is that codependency is usually trauma-based. And we can work with trauma. We can do a lot of work to heal that and change those patterns. But when it's personality based, it is, personality is really hardwired into who we are. And when we're dealing with that, what we can do is we can raise awareness of what's going on within our personality, and we can try to manage it. but we can't really do all this trauma treatment to get our personality to change. It is kind of who we are. So it's really important for people to understand that, you can be both. You could have those traits and be codependent and need to kind of work on both pieces. Or you might be confused about what is a personality trait that makes me this nice, people-pleasing kind of person, or am I just codependent? So it's really important to figure out the difference if you want to help yourself figure out how to avoid these kinds of relationships.
What are the warning signs?
Good question.
I think that's a really, really big one as well.
Yes. Well, and one of the things I like to teach people is that I like to think of it as there's external red flags and internal red flags. The external red flags are the things to look for in a partner. And those are the things like, you kind of mentioned with your partner. In the beginning, it can be a little tricky to spot a narcissist or a sociopath because they can seem like your soulmate. And what happens is it can start really hot and heavy, and they come in and you seem like you've met the perfect mate for you. They might have everything in common with you, it seems. And, some initial red flags might be that they move really fast. So they might tell you they love you within a couple of weeks when they barely know you. They might want to move in with you, or they might make a marriage proposal within weeks or months of the relationship. And that fast moving and kind of pace is definitely a red flag. And then there's also, just this, what we call it is love bombing. It's where they are just throwing, the love on you so heavily. They might shower you with gifts and praise and attention and put you up on a pedestal. And one of the things that they do is they mirror you. So they watch your mannerisms, they listen to all the things that you're interested in, and they are highly skilled at mirroring that back to you. So if you say you're into spiritual things, they're going to say, I'm into the same spiritual things. Or I love tennis. Oh, I'm a tennis pro. But then later on, you take them out to play tennis and you realize they've never played tennis before. So it's, there's these subtle things that they do in the beginning, but usually what happens, especially with a narcissist, is the mask slips. And what I mean by that is at some point, you're going to see the other side of their personality. And this is why it's super important to move very slow with any new partner, because you just don't know until you've spent some time with somebody. So don't move in quickly. Don't get married within weeks. It seems like it should be a given, but a lot of people fall into this. So those are some of the red flags initially. And then when the mask slips, you start to see this other side of them that can be really critical, controlling, jealous, or you might see things in their personality, like they seem really like they are just superior to everybody, or the laws don't apply to them, but they apply to everybody else, or, super sensitive to criticism, or even if they perceive that you criticize them or disagree with them, they fly off the handle. Also, gaslighting is a big red flag where, gaslighting is where you're having this conversation and they somehow turn things around on you. And all of a sudden you're feeling blamed for something that you didn't do, or you're super confused about what just happened. An example is, let's say they're doing something suspicious, you find another person, they're texting some other woman, and you confront them about it, and they flip out, turn it around on you and say, you're a jealous person, you're so insecure, what's wrong with you? How dare you, take away my freedom? That's gaslighting. So those are some
one of the other things that cropped up for me was that he would make a comment to me, and I'd say that really hurt. That wasn't very nice. And immediately, I was only joking. You haven't got a sense of humor.
Yes. Those subtle, passive things.
Really doubting yourself, because I think some of the others you could say the texting and so on is a bit. I think that one of, oh, what's the matter? Have you not got a sense of humor? That's where
Yes,
it's such a simple one, and then you start really, because that's really delving into your whole being.
totally.
So yeah,
Yes.
I have to say, at the end of that relationship, when I finally got out, and it was the most horrendous divorce you could ever imagine. I mean, it broke me, almost broke me financially and personally, my whole being. My confidence was way, 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 way down,
Mm-hmm.
miles down, under, so far down. I was so scared of my own shadow
Yeah.
almost.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing when you're saying let's take things slowly with relationships, because
Mhm.
it's the damage that it does to us as human beings, or can do. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? I think there's a very, very old saying. They say, marry in haste, repent at leisure. I don't know if you've heard that saying, but
No.
there's a lot to be said for that. When we marry too quickly, or we get into a relationship too quickly, or move in too quickly, yeah, that's easy. But getting out of it, that's another matter.
Yes.
Uh,
So true. Yeah, especially if you're with a narcissist.
yeah, yeah. I think I think you've given so many good tips already. I was going to say, what is one thing that people can take away with them? But I think you've offered so much. But is there one particular thing you'd like to kind of mention that's so important?
Yeah, one thing that I would say is you always know. And, we didn't really have a chance to go in too deep on the internal red flags. Like, how do we know if we're, are we listening to ourselves? Are we listening to our gut? And just noticing those little moments where we question something. And that's what I want people to take away from this, that usually we know from the beginning, but it's only in retrospect where we look back and we're like, oh, now I see it, So whenever you're questioning something, check it out. If you find yourself Googling what are the signs of narcissistic personality disorder, that's probably a big sign that you're with one, So just listen to yourself. Don't doubt yourself. Don't question yourself. And I know that's super hard when you're in these relationships, but that's the biggest thing. You always know, trust yourself.
Yeah, you're so right. Because I knew at the very beginning he
Yeah.
wasn't the right person for me. But there is that you persuade yourself. There are lots of reasons why we persuade ourselves that, yeah, I could make this work, or it's not as bad as I think it is, or I'm just being too picky, all those things. And I think
Right.
that there's such important things that we should really listen to ourselves. And if you don't leave that relationship, at least step back from it and give it more time. I think that's such wise words. Well, I know we could talk for so much longer, and maybe we've got to do this again, Chelli, because I think there's some really good stuff in here, and especially related to trauma as well. I think that would be brilliant. I'm going to put all your details in the show notes, but what's one easy way that people can get in touch with you?
Probably just go to my website. It has all the links on it. My name is Chelli Pumphrey. So it's chellipumphrey.com, and it's Chelli with a Chelli. And it'll probably be better to look at the show notes to spell it.
Okay. And you're also very active on Instagram as well, because I know
Yes.
we're connected on there. Oh, thank you so much for today. It's been brilliant. I hope that everyone listening has enjoyed it. And I think we need to talk again, because there's such a lot in there. But thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it too, Wendy.
I hope you found this episode interesting as well as helpful. Do get in touch if you would like to learn more about working with me. My email address is info@wendykapewell.co.uk. Take good care of yourself. Until next time.